It was a gray, drizzling morning in Seattle on April 8, 1994. The kind that seeps into your bones in whispers of forgotten dreams. The city, still humming with the echoes of its grunge revolution, held its breath as an electrician climbed the stairs to the greenhouse above Kurt Cobain's garage, tools in hand for a routine job. What he found there shattered the illusion of normalcy, for sprawled on the floor was the body of the man who had become the reluctant voice of a generation, his lifeless form a stark punctuation mark in the haze of cigarette smoke and lingering despair that clung to the air like a bad memory. Kurt Cobain's body was discovered that day in the greenhouse atrium above the garage of his Seattle home, a space that overlooked Lake Washington, where the water lapped mournfully against the shore, and the overcast sky mirrored the turmoil of an era on the brink of change. The discovery painted a picture of solitude and finality amid the potted plants and glass walls that trapped the faint scent of earth and decay, suggesting a man who had retreated to this elevated sanctuary to confront his demons alone, away from the clamor of fame's relentless pursuit. Yet in that quiet reveal, questions began to simmer beneath the surface. For how does one reconcile the end of an icon with the mundane arrival of a handyman, turning a private agony into a public spectacle that would fuel whispers for decades? Across his chest lay the Remington Model 11, a 20-gauge shotgun recovered at the scene, its barrel still warm from the fatal discharge, the wood and metal gleaming dully under the diffused light, filtering through the greenhouse panes, surrounded by the scattered remnants of a life unraveling. This weapon, compact and unassuming, fit the narrative of a desperate act in the early 90s, when Seattle's streets pulsed with the raw energy of alternative rock, and artists like Cobain wielded their pain as both shield and sword against a world that demanded too much. But the placement of that shotgun invited scrutiny, a silent accusation that perhaps the scene was too neatly arranged, challenging the assumption that chaos always leaves its mark in disarray, rather than deliberate poise. Pinned into a planter nearby was a handwritten note, addressed in part to Boda, Cobain's childhood imaginary friend, its words scrawled in red ink on lined paper, the soil beneath it damp from recent watering, evoking the ghost of innocence lost amid the thorns of adulthood. In the context of 1994, as grunge's fire began to flicker under commercial pressures, this note read like a farewell from a soul weary of the spotlight. Its references to faded passions and imagined companions painting a portrait of isolation in a city alive with musical fervor. The note's cryptic pleas hinted at layers unspoken, a testament that even in death, Cobain's words could unravel the tidy conclusions drawn by those who never truly knew the man behind the myth. The King County Medical Examiner's autopsy and toxicology report detailed a gunshot wound to the head, with morphine levels at approximately 1.52 milligrams per liter, a concentration of heroin metabolite that saturated his veins, and detectable traces of diazepam adding to the chemical fog. Amid the sterile fluorescence of the morgue and the lingering metallic tang of blood, these findings captured the essence of an artist's tormented final days, in a time when substance abuse shadowed the creative highs of Seattle's underground scene. Such a lethal dose raises a shadow over the mechanics of self-infliction, for it defies the body's limits on coherency and control, planting seeds of doubt in the soil of official records. The immediate official conclusion was suicide, declared with the swift certainty of authorities eager to close the book on a tragedy that gripped the nation. The coroner's stamp, echoing through newsrooms, heavy with the scent of fresh ink and urgency. In the spring of 1994, as fans mourned and the music world reeled, this ruling seemed to fit the archetype of the troubled genius. His struggles with addiction and fame, a familiar refrain in the annals of rock history. Yet beneath that verdict lurked apparent contradictions, like the improbability of precise action amid overwhelming narcosis, suggesting that the story might not end with a simple pull of the trigger, but unravel into something far more shadowed. As we stand at the threshold of this dark investigation, the greenhouse scene lingers like a half-remembered dream, its details sharp against the blur of memory, inviting us to question what lies beyond the obvious. The fallen icon, Kurt Cobain, didn't just die that day. He became enigma, wrapped in the fog of Seattle's perpetual rain, his end the canvas for theories that refuse to fade. But to understand the man and the mystery, we must first step back into the vibrant chaos of early 1990s Seattle, where grunge rose from the shadows and Cobain's star burned brightest before the fall. In the shadowed underbelly of what we call history, where the echoes of electric guitars still reverberate against the damp walls of forgotten clubs, Kurt Cobain, the 27-year-old frontman of Nirvana, occupies a singular, almost mythic place in late 20th century music. The rain-slicked streets of Seattle in the early 90s pulsed with a raw energy, where fog rolled in from Puget Sound and mingled with the acrid smoke of amplifiers pushed to their limits. It was an era when the Pacific Northwest's perpetual drizzle seemed to fuel a musical revolution, birthing bands from dimly lit basements that challenged the glossy excess of the 80s hair metal scene. This grunge movement wasn't just sound. It was a cultural upheaval, a rejection of artifice that implied something deeper, a collective sigh from a generation disillusioned with the American dream, turning inward to express the alienation simmering beneath the surface of suburban sprawl. Cobain and Nirvana rocketed to the forefront with albums like Nevermind and tracks such as Smells Like Teen Spirit that supercharged a global cultural shift known as grunge, blasting through airwaves and MTV screens with a ferocity that dismantled barriers between underground authenticity and mainstream mania. Picture those heady days, the scent of wet flannel and cheap beer hanging heavy in venues like the Crocodile Cafe, where crowds thrashed in a sea of plaid shirts and Doc Martens, the music a cathartic roar against the polished veneer of corporate rock. Seattle became the epicenter, a gritty haven where misfits found their voice amid the emerald gloom of evergreen forests and overcast skies. Yet, this rise carried an undercurrent of irony, for it thrust Cobain into a spotlight he never fully embraced, highlighting the chasm between the movement's anti-establishment ethos and the very fame that amplified it, leaving artists like him ensnared in a web of expectations that could crush the spirit as easily as elevate it. By early 1994, he had become the public symbol of a movement and of the contradictions that pillared his life, creative genius clashing against chronic physical pain, ambivalence toward fame, warring with escalating substance dependence, all while pressures, commercial, contractual, and personal, tied him to it with an unyielding grip. The city's music scene thrummed with a chaotic vitality, coffee houses buzzing with the chatter of aspiring musicians and the haze of cigarette smoke, where nights blurred into dawns under neon signs flickering against the perpetual gray. It was a breeding ground for innovation, yet laced with the desperation of those chasing dreams in a town overshadowed by tech booms and timber busts. These elements wove a tapestry of torment, suggesting that Cobain's ascent was less a triumph than a prelude to fracture, where the very forces that propelled him forward began to erode the foundations of his sanity, setting the stage for a downfall that felt almost predestined in its tragedy. His chronic physical pain stemmed from an undiagnosed stomach ailment that gnawed at him relentlessly, a constant companion through tours and recording sessions, where the throb of distorted chords might drown out the agony for a moment, but never silenced it entirely. Amid the clamor of sold-out arenas and the flash of paparazzi bulbs, Seattle's underbelly offered fleeting escapes, dive bars echoing with feedback and the distant hum of ferries on the sound. Yet this environment only amplified his isolation, turning the city's vibrant scene into a mirror of his inner turmoil. The implication was profound. Pain became both muse and destroyer, fueling lyrics that resonated with millions while eroding his will to endure the spotlight, revealing how genius often walks hand in hand with suffering in the unforgiving world of rock stardom. Ambivalence toward fame manifested in his public persona, the reluctant icon who smashed guitars on stage, as if to shatter the very pedestal he'd been placed upon. His interviews laced with sarcasm that barely masked a deeper disdain for the machinery of celebrity. In the context of grunge's DIY ethos, where bands recorded in garages amidst the scent of motor oil and musty basements, this reluctance clashed with the commercial tidal wave that followed Nevermind's success, transforming underground anthems into platinum-selling commodities overnight. It underscored a bitter truth: that fame's embrace could suffocate the authenticity it sought to celebrate, leaving Cobain trapped in a paradox where his anti-hero status only heightened the expectations he loathed. Escalating substance dependence crept in as a shadow over his days, heroin's grip tightening amid the chaos of international tours and the relentless grind of album promotions. A crutch that numbed the pain but invited darker demons. The Seattle scene, with its undercurrents of excess hidden behind layers of irony and punk attitude, provided a backdrop where such dependencies flourished unchecked. The city's fog-shrouded alleys, whispering secrets of artists lost to their vices. This dependency hinted at a deeper unraveling, where self-medication blurred the lines between coping and capitulation, foreshadowing how personal battles could eclipse even the brightest creative sparks. And it's this inexorable convergence of genius and fragility that exposes the hollow core of the official narrative, a fragility too profound to be dismissed as mere coincidence in the lead-up to his end. Commercial pressures mounted as record labels demanded more hits, contractual obligations binding him to tours that drained his spirit, while personal entanglements with family, with love, with his own haunted past, wove a noose of expectations. By 1994, the air in Seattle carried a chill beyond the weather, with the grunge wave cresting and crashing, leaving behind a trail of burnout and broken dreams amid the coffee-stained notebooks and discarded demo tapes. These pressures implied a system designed to exploit rather than nurture, where the machinery of fame ground down its brightest stars, turning Cobain's life into a cautionary tale of what happens when art collides with commerce. As we peel back these layers, the rise of grunge reveals not just a musical era, but a human story fraught with shadows, setting the scene for the turbulent weeks that would follow. In the shadowed haze of early 1994, Kurt Cobain's world was unraveling like a frayed guitar string, each pluck echoing the strain of a life pulled too taut. Friends and family watched helplessly as he teetered on the edge, his chronic physical pain, a relentless ache from scoliosis and stomach issues, gnawing at him day and night, transforming simple movements into ordeals that no amount of fame could anesthetize. The air in Seattle carried the damp chill of perpetual rain, mirroring the gloom that settled over Cobain's Lake Washington home, where the escalating substance dependence had become his shadowed companion. Heroin slipping into his veins like a false promise of relief amid the chaos of rock stardom. This wasn't just addiction. It was a desperate grasp at numbness, a way to drown out the roar of expectations that pressed in from all sides, leaving him oscillating between a fierce desire to vanish from the spotlight and the iron chains of commercial pressures that bound him to the stage. Label executives, with their polished offices reeking of cigar smoke and ambition, recounted how Cobain's ambivalence clashed against contractual obligations. His pleas to cancel tours falling on ears tuned only to the sound of cash registers ringing. Yet, in quieter moments, he confided in friends about walking away entirely, dreaming of a life unburdened by the machine that had elevated him. The Rome incident in March 1994 stands as a stark marker, a documented overdose, where champagne mixed with Rohypnol sent him into a coma that lasted days. The sterile hum of hospital machines in that ancient city, underscoring the fragility of a man who had already flirted with oblivion too many times. Medical personnel, their voices laced with clinical detachment, described reviving him from what looked like a suicide attempt, though Cobain later dismissed it as an accident. But the implication lingered like smoke in a dim-lit room, hinting at a deeper despair that no intervention could fully extinguish. Back in the States, the days blurred into a fog of contradictions. His chronic depression, evident in the hollow-eyed stares captured in photographs and the weary sighs reported by those closest to him, painting a portrait of isolation amid adulation, where personal pressures from marriage and fatherhood warred with the urge to withdraw. Family members spoke of his oscillating moods, one moment vowing to quit the band, and the next succumbing to the gravitational pull of Nirvana's success, the weight of which seemed to crush his spirit, even as it lifted his name to mythic heights. Eyewitness accounts from that period weave a tapestry of turmoil, friends recalling late-night conversations in dimly lit bars where Cobain expressed a burning desire to escape the touring life. The endless cycle of airports and screaming crowds that left him drained and disillusioned. Yet, the substance dependence escalated, each hit a temporary balm for the physical pain that racked his body, a scoliosis-born agony compounded by mysterious stomach ailments the doctors could never fully diagnose, turning meals into battles and rest into rarity. This prior overdose behavior wasn't isolated. It echoed earlier brushes with death, each one a ripple in the pond of his existence, suggesting patterns that friends and medical personnel noted with growing alarm, their testimonies revealing a man trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. The atmosphere of those last weeks felt heavy with unspoken tensions, the Seattle grunge scene's raw energy now tainted by the scent of burnout and betrayal, as Cobain navigated the minefield of relationships strained by his addictions and depressions. Label executives pressured for more tours, more albums, their corporate greed clashing with Cobain's artistic soul, creating a rift that widened with every refusal, every cancelled show. The implication was clear. This wasn't just professional discord, but a profound existential conflict eating away at his core. In the quiet hours, when the rain pattered against the windows of his home, Cobain's expressed desire to withdraw from it all, to leave the industry, the fame, the relentless gaze, clashed against the personal ties that held him, love for his daughter and wife, pulling him back even as the pain pushed him toward the abyss. Friends described these oscillations in hushed tones, painting a picture of a man who laughed one day and vanished into silence the next, his chronic depression a dark cloud that no success could dispel. Its roots tracing back to a troubled youth, now amplified by the spotlight's glare. The Rome overdose, with its mix of pills and alcohol in a hotel room far from home, served as a grim prelude, medical records detailing the coma that followed. A brush with finality that should have been a wake-up call, but instead deepened the shadows around him.
As April approached, the escalating substance dependence became impossible to ignore. Interventions attempted by loved ones in rooms thick with worry and cigarette smoke.
Yet each effort seemed to bounce off the walls of his resolve, or lack thereof. This is the thread that unravels the narrative of inevitability, a pattern of pain and pressure that defies any simple tale of ascent and fall. Testimonies from those weeks converge on a single truth. Cobain was a man divided, his body racked by unrelenting pain, his mind by depression, and his spirit by the conflicting pulls of escape and obligation, setting the stage for what would come on that fateful day in April. The air grew thicker with foreboding as the calendar turned, each day a step closer to the edge, with a documentary record of his struggles, letters, interviews, and medical notes, reveals not just a rock star's decline, but a human being's quiet unraveling. And so, in these last days, the contradictions mounted, friends and family witnessing a soul in torment, caught between the desire to fade away and the forces that refuse to let go, all building toward the moment that would shock the world. The calendar flipped to April 5th, 1994, and in the dim haze of a Seattle spring, something irreversible unfolded in the greenhouse above Kurt Cobain's garage. It was there, amidst the clutter of a life unraveling, that the King County Medical Examiner would later estimate the time of death, pinning it firmly to that overcast day. Rain pattered against the windows like hesitant applause, the air thick with the damp chill of the Pacific Northwest, where grunge anthems still echoed from car radios and flannel shirts hung heavy with a weight of unspoken despair. This was the era of fading dreams, when the spotlight's glare turned heroes into ghosts. That estimation wasn't just a bureaucratic stamp, but a silent accusation against the days that followed. Days when the world spun unoblivious, leaving a body to cool in solitude, whispering questions about what might have been prevented if only the shadows had been pierced sooner. 3 days later, on April 8th, 1994, an electrician named Gary Smith arrived at the Lake Washington Boulevard estate to install security lighting, his tools clinking in the quiet morning as he climbed the stairs to the greenhouse, unsuspecting of the tableau awaiting him. The room smelled of stale earth and something metallic, sharper, the kind of scent that clings to forgotten corners in a city where rain never fully washes away the grime. It was the tail end of an era defined by raw emotion, where rock stars burned bright and brief against the gray skyline. Smith's discovery peeled back the veil on a tragedy that had simmered in secrecy, forcing the official timeline into the harsh light and revealing how isolation can stretch a single moment into an eternity of what-ifs. There lay Kurt Cobain, his body positioned on the floor with a Remington Model 1120 gauge shotgun draped across his chest, the barrel still warm in memory, if not in fact, a relic of rural hunts repurposed for a final, desperate act. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light filtering through grimy panes. The greenhouse, a makeshift sanctuary turned tomb, redolent of potting soil and faded cigarette smoke. In a time when Seattle's music scene pulsed with the raw energy of rebellion against polished pop illusions. That shotgun's placement spoke volumes in its silence, a heavy emblem of intent that anchored the scene, yet invited scrutiny over whether such a pose could truly emerge from the chaos of self-inflicted oblivion. Nearby, a handwritten note was pinned into the soft dirt of a planter, its words scrawled in red ink, addressed to imaginary friends and real loved ones. A farewell etched with the tremor of a hand on the edge. The planter's soil was cool and yielding under the note's stake, the air humming with the distant drone of the city awakening back in '94, when personal demons were confessed through lyrics and letters, raw and unfiltered in an analog world. This note wasn't merely paper and ink, but a cryptic testament that blurred the lines between apology and accusation, leaving interpreters to ponder if it truly sealed the narrative or pried it open wider. The toxicology report, released in the autopsy's wake, revealed morphine levels soaring at approximately 1.52 milligrams per liter in his blood. An astronomical concentration that painted a picture of profound impairment, laced with traces of diazepam for good measure. In the sterile glow of laboratory lights, amid the beeps of machines analyzing life's final chemistry, this was the grunge epoch's underbelly, where substances flowed like the muddy waters of the Puget Sound, numbing the pain of fame's relentless grind. Such extreme levels don't just numb the senses, they erode the very capacity for deliberate action, casting a long shadow over how a man in that fog could navigate the mechanics of his own end with such apparent precision. It's this chemical overload that twists the knife in the official verdict, a saturation so profound it challenges the feasibility of coordinated movements, like loading and positioning a shotgun without a falter. The body itself bore the marks of finality, the wound self-evident, yet the condition, undisturbed for days, suggested a scene frozen in time, untouched by intruders or second thoughts. Flies might have begun their grim vigil in the enclosed space, the greenhouse's humidity amplifying the decay's subtle advance. Set against a backdrop of 90s Seattle, where alternative rock's icons wrestled with inner storms as fierce as the coastal gales. This pristine preservation implied a solitude so absolute it bordered on the orchestrated, prompting whispers about whether fate or foul play ensured no one interrupted the tableau until April 8th. Authorities arrived swiftly after Smith's call, securing the scene with yellow tape that fluttered in the breeze, their notepads filling with details that would feed the official line of suicide. Handled with the procedural efficiency of a city no stranger to loss. Sirens cut through the neighborhood's hush, tires crunching on gravel drives, in an age when police radios crackled with the urgency of breaking stories, and the media hovered like vultures sensing fresh carrion. Yet, this handling masked underlying currents, as the timeline's gaps, from death to discovery, hinted at oversights or deliberate blindness, fueling debates that persist in the dim corners of true crime lore. As we piece together these fragments, the incident of April 5th emerges not as a clean endpoint, but a murky nexus of facts and shadows, where high morphine clouds judgment and a note's words linger like unsolved riddles. The greenhouse, with its glass walls reflecting distorted realities, stood as a metaphor for Cobain's world, transparent yet impenetrable, in the heart of a decade that idolized its tormented artists. And in that reflection, we see the implication clear. What was deemed a tragic choice might conceal layers deeper than the official reports dare to delve, setting the stage for the chaos that erupted in the days immediately following. We've slowly unpacked the details of the incident itself, including the timing, the scene, and the official autopsy data. Now, let's step into the immediate aftermath. That chaotic blur from the discovery on April 8, 1994, through those first frantic 24 to 48 hours, where the world learned of Kurt Cobain's death, and the authorities moved with a speed that still raises eyebrows. It started with the electrician's grim find in the greenhouse above the garage at 171 Lake Washington Boulevard East, a body slumped in a pool of blood. The air thick with the metallic tang of gunpowder and the lingering haze of decay. This was Seattle in early spring, the city shrouded in its perpetual drizzle. Grunge echoes fading as news trucks began to swarm like vultures sensing carrion. The Seattle Police Department arrived swiftly, their cruisers cutting through the morning fog, led by Sergeant Don Cameron, a veteran cop in a town where rock stars bled into the headlines. They secured the scene, cordoning off the property with yellow tape that fluttered in the wind, while inside, the remnants of a life lay scattered, implying a haste to judgment that would echo for decades. Forensic teams moved in, gloved hands cataloging every detail. The Remington Model 11 shotgun found draped across Cobain's body, its barrel still warm from the fatal discharge, shells ejected nearby. This was 1994, an era when celebrity deaths fueled tabloid frenzies. The room heavy with the scent of stale heroin smoke, and wilting flowers from fans already gathering outside. That shotgun, purchased just days before, came with receipts tucked into Cobain's pockets, alongside drug paraphernalia that painted a picture of despair. In the dim light filtering through the greenhouse glass, investigators noted how these items suggested a man preparing for an end. Yet their presence invited questions about the narrative's tidy closure. The handwritten note, impaled on a planter with a pen, was carefully extracted and sent to the Washington State Crime Lab, where analysts declared it authentic, matching Cobain's scrawl down to the anguished loops and crosses. Amid the buzz of police radios and the distant hum of the city, this declaration sealed the story for many, but it hinted at layers of pain that official reports could never fully unravel. No usable fingerprints turned up on the gun, the shells, or even the pen. A curious void in a scene otherwise rich with evidence. Seattle's grimy underbelly, still reeling from the grunge explosion, provided the backdrop where such absences might whisper of overlooked truths, challenging the rush to file it all away. Early witness interviews unfolded in those initial hours. Statements from the electrician, household staff, and close associates captured on notepads smudged with rain. The atmosphere was one of shock, mixed with the Northwest's stoic resignation, each account reinforcing the isolation that had gripped Cobain. Yet collectively they propel the case toward an inexorable conclusion. Media reports erupted almost immediately, framing the death as a tragic suicide. Headlines screaming across wires from Seattle to New York. In newsrooms alive with the clatter of keyboards and the acrid smell of fresh ink, journalists pieced together a story of a tormented artist, their words shaping public perception before the dust had settled. The King County Medical Examiner's autopsy, conducted with clinical precision, confirmed the cause. A self-inflicted shotgun wound, toxicology revealing a cocktail of substances that dulled the edges of reality. This was the grunge capital, where excess and artistry intertwined, and the findings implied a deliberate exit, though they left lingering shadows of doubt for those who looked closer. Evidence was meticulously catalogued: the shotgun, the shells, the note, even the receipts for the weapon found crumpled in his clothing. Under the glare of portable lights set up in the greenhouse, officers worked methodically, their actions underscoring a process that, while thorough, seemed geared toward confirmation rather than exploration. Drug paraphernalia scattered about, from syringes to residue-laced spoons, was noted and bagged, speaking to the addictions that had plagued Cobain's final days. In a city where the heroin wave was cresting, these items wove into the suicide tapestry, suggesting a spiral that ended in solitude. Yet they also prompted whispers about what might have been missed. The police case file was closed with remarkable speed, the Seattle PD and the medical examiner aligning on the suicide ruling, wrapping up the formal inquiry before the weekend had passed. This efficiency, in the face of a global icon's demise, carried an undercurrent of finality that felt almost too neat, a conclusion that muffled any nascent questions. It is this rapid shuttering of the investigation that casts a long shadow over the official verdict, a haste that defies the complexity of the man's life and death. Reactions poured in from fans and fellow musicians, a collective mourning that filled the airwaves and streets, vigils springing up under overcast skies. The era's raw emotion amplified the tragedy, implying a cultural loss that official closures couldn't contain, setting the stage for years of speculation. Yet, as the scene was cleared and evidence stored away, the quick classification as suicide by the authorities marked the end of one chapter. In the quiet that followed, doubts began to simmer privately, among those who knew Cobain or questioned the details. The note's authenticity, affirmed by experts, stood as a pillar of the ruling, its words a farewell laced with bitterness and love. Analyzed in sterile lab conditions, far from the chaos. It reinforced the narrative, but its implications stretched into the realms of mental anguish and unspoken pressures. Receipts for the Remington and its shells, documented meticulously, traced back to a recent purchase, embedding the act in premeditation, against the backdrop of Seattle's bustling music scene. Now silenced by grief, these papers suggested intent, though they also highlighted the ease of acquiring such means. With the case officially closed, the police stepped back, their files sealed, the inquiry deemed complete. This closure, in a time when alternative theories were just whispers, implied a confidence that would later be tested by persistent voices. Next, we examined the commencement of the investigation, scrutinizing the early procedures, evidence collection, and any initial private doubts or external observations. The official verdict had barely settled into the damp Seattle soil
when the first whispers of doubt began to stir, like a fog rolling in off the sound, thick and unyielding.
It was the spring of 1994, a time when grunge still echoed through the rainy streets, and the world was reeling from the loss of its reluctant icon. Yet, amid the grief, a few sharp-eyed souls refused to let the story end there. These early skeptics, private investigators, handwriting experts, and even some close to the inner circle, started poking at the seams of the narrative, uncovering threads that pulled the whole tapestry into question, suggesting that perhaps the haste to close the case had left too much in the shadows. Enter Tom Grant, a no-nonsense private eye hired just days before the body was found, his trench coat metaphorically soaked in the cynicism of 1,000 unsolved riddles. Grant had been brought on to track down a missing rock star, navigating the neon-lit haze of Los Angeles and Seattle's underbelly, where the air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and unspoken secrets. What he uncovered, or rather, what he claimed the police overlooked, planted seeds of doubt that would grow into a forest of controversy, challenging the very foundation of the suicide ruling, and hinting at a deeper, more sinister plot lurking beneath the surface. Grant pointed to the scene itself, photographs revealing a heroin kit laid out with an almost meticulous care. Capped syringes, balls of cotton, and remnants of black tar heroin arranged neatly beside the body. In the dim light of that greenhouse above the garage, with the scent of earth and decay hanging heavy, this setup struck many as too orderly for a man in the throes of a fatal overdose, the era's rampant drug culture notwithstanding. Such precision implied not the chaos of despair, but a staged tableau, one that raised questions about whether the final act was truly self-directed or orchestrated by unseen hands, fueling theories that refused to die with the official closure. Then there was the suicide note, that cryptic farewell penned on a sheet of paper, its words analyzed and reanalyzed in the flickering glow of desk lamps across independent labs. Handwriting analysts, poring over the loops and slants in rooms filled with the musty odor of old documents and fresh ink, noted shifts in style, particularly in the final lines that seemed to veer from the rest. These anomalies suggested forgery or alteration, a break in the emotional flow that didn't match the raw, anguished tone of a man bidding adieu, thereby casting a long shadow over the note's authenticity and the story it was meant to seal. Family members and friends gathered in hushed living rooms, where the rain pattered endlessly against the windows, echoed these private doubts, their conversations laced with the bitterness of unresolved grief. In an age before social media amplified every whisper, these voices carried weight in quiet circles, pointing to inconsistencies that the police had dismissed amid the media frenzy and public mourning. Their skepticism implied a rush to judgment, one that overlooked potential foul play in favor of a tidy resolution, perpetuating a divide between official narrative and lingering suspicion. Forensic re-examinations would come later, but even in those early days, the air buzzed with pointed critiques from experts outside the official fold, their reports stacking up like unsolved case files on a cluttered desk. The police files, sealed with the finality of a slammed door in a dimly lit precinct, treated the matter as settled, yet no new evidence emerged to reopen the case, leaving the doubters to stew in the humid Pacific Northwest evenings. This institutional inertia only amplified the implications, suggesting that perhaps the truth was buried not just with the body, but under layers of bureaucratic indifference, or worse. And here's the snag that twists the knife in the heart of the official tale. A blood morphine level so sky high it defies the possibility of conscious action. Yet the scene remains pristine, as if death itself had tidied up before departing. Grant's involvement didn't stop at initial reports. He became a persistent thorn, his voice gravelly and insistent in interviews that cut through the static of 90s radio waves. Amid the cultural upheaval of alternative rock's peak, with amplifiers humming in the background, his challenges to the investigation's completeness resonated with a public hungry for more than surface-level answers. By doing so, he not only highlighted gaps in the probe, but also ignited a flame of ongoing controversy, one that burned brightly, despite the authorities' efforts to douse it. These early scrutinies set the stage for what was to come, a web of doubts that entangled the case in perpetual debate, even as the world moved on. The neatly capped syringes, the questioned script, the private reservations, all lingered like ghosts in the misty Seattle dawn, refusing to fade into acceptance. And though the files gathered dust, the questions they provoked ensured that this story, like the man at its center, would never truly rest in peace. In the shadowed underbelly of every investigation, there's a point where the whispers of doubt collide with the ironclad walls of officialdom. And in the case of Kurt Cobain's death, that collision echoed through the halls of the Seattle Police Department and the King County Medical Examiner's office, unyielding and resolute. We'd been digging into those early private skepticisms, the scene inconsistencies and handwriting doubts that bubbled up like steam from the damp Seattle streets. But now, let's turn our gaze to the institutional pushback, where the guardians of the official narrative stood firm, their statements as steadfast as the rain-slicked concrete of the Emerald City. Back in 1994, just months after the shotgun's blast shattered the quiet above Lake Washington, Sergeant Don Cameron of the SPD laid it out plain. He declared that the totality of the evidence, every scrap, every detail, pointed unequivocally to suicide. No shadows of homicide lurking in the corners. The air in those precinct rooms hung heavy with the scent of fresh coffee and old case files. The grunge era's chaos still pulsing faintly through the radio static as officers sifted through reports under flickering fluorescent lights. It was a time when Seattle was grieving its reluctant icon, and the department was eager to close the book on a tragedy that had the world watching. Cameron's words weren't just a dismissal. They were a fortress, implying that to question the ruling was to ignore the weight of forensic certainty, a stance that locked the narrative in place and left skeptics pounding at gates that wouldn't budge. Fast forward 2 decades to 2014, and the story stirred again when dead, Mike Sierzinski dusted off an undeveloped roll of film from the crime scene, forgotten in some evidence locker, like a ghost from the past. He processed it, reviewed the images with a veteran's eye, and concluded there was nothing new, no hidden truths emerging from the grainy shadows to warrant reopening the case. By then, the city had transformed, its skyline piercing the perpetual overcast with tech-fueled ambition, while the echoes of Nirvana's riffs faded into nostalgia. Sierzinski's review unfolded in a department modernized yet haunted by old files, the click of digital scanners replacing the shuffle of paper as he pored over photos that captured the greenhouse's grim tableau in stark, undeveloped detail. This revelation, instead of cracking the facade, only reinforced it, suggesting that even time and technology couldn't unearth evidence of foul play, thereby deepening the divide between official closure and the persistent undercurrent of public doubt. The SPD's chain of custody records stood as their unassailable defense, meticulously documented logs that traced every item from the scene to storage, ensuring no tampering could taint the trail. In statements from both eras, detectives like Cameron and Ciesinski emphasized this rigor, claiming it upheld the suicide ruling without flaw. Amid the bustle of a precinct alive with the hum of radios and the clatter of keyboards, these records evoked an era of procedural grit, where the fog rolling in from Puget Sound mirrored the haze of uncertainty. Yet the department's protocols cut through it like a lighthouse beam. Such emphasis on procedural integrity implied more than just diligence. It was a barrier, one that dismissed calls for re-evaluation by insisting the foundation was solid, leaving conspiracy theorists to grapple with a system that prized its own consistency above all. Over at the King County Medical Examiner's office, the response was equally unmovable. They reaffirmed the original autopsy findings, declining to reconsider in light of newer forensic arguments that claimed inconsistencies in blood toxicology or wound patterns. The office, with its sterile corridors smelling of antiseptic and quiet resolve, operated in the clinical hush of post-mortem truths, where the 90s grunge fallout met the cold precision of scalpels and reports. Even as alternative theories surfaced in books and documentaries, the examiners held their ground, their rebuttals sharp and data-driven. This steadfastness carried a profound implication. By rejecting these claims outright, they not only preserved the suicide verdict, but also challenged the credibility of dissenting experts, perpetuating a narrative where science aligned solely with the official line. Throughout it all, both the SPD and the medical examiner's office maintained there was no credible proof of homicide to date. Their official stance, a resounding rejection of any push to reopen the investigation. Statements from 1994 and 2014 echoed this, underscoring autopsy consistency and investigative thoroughness. In the dim glow of archived evidence rooms, where dust motes danced in beams from high windows, this position felt like the city's own fog, dense, enveloping, and resistant to the winds of change that conspiracy winds tried to stir. Yet it's this immovable certainty, even in the face of unearthed film and evolving forensics, that hangs like an unresolved chord in the symphony of doubt, refusing to harmonize with the questions that linger. The deeper meaning here slices through the noir haze. Institutions, once set on a path, become monoliths. They're reaffirmations, not just defenses, but declarations, that the case is sealed, buried under layers of protocol and time. And so, as we wrap this chapter of Pushback, the official voices fade into the background hum of the city, leaving us to ponder the walls they've built. But the story doesn't end here. Next, we plunge into the shadows cast by those closest to Cobain, their roles, motivations, and the tangled web they weave in this enduring controversy. We've just peeled back the layers of institutional resistance, that stubborn refusal to revisit the official line on Kurt Cobain's death, no matter how the questions pile up like unpaid bills in a forgotten drawer. But in the shadows of that resistance, a couple of figures have refused to fade into the background. They've stepped forward with their own spotlights, casting long, jagged shadows over the narrative we've all been sold. First, there's Tom Grant, the private investigator originally hired by Courtney Love herself back in those frantic days leading up to April 1994, when the world was still holding its breath for news of the missing rock icon. Grant wasn't some wide-eyed amateur stumbling into the scene. He was a seasoned Los Angeles PI, the kind who'd seen the underbelly of Hollywood's glamour, where deals are whispered in smoke-filled rooms, and truths get buried under layers of legal tape. Hired to track down Cobain after he vanished from a rehab facility, Grant found himself knee-deep in a web of inconsistencies that didn't just nag at him. They clawed their way into his convictions, turning him from a hired hand into a vocal skeptic who argues the case screams for further inquiry. In the grimy haze of mid-90s Seattle, where the rain never quite washes away the grit, Grant's motivations shifted from professional duty to something more personal, a dogged pursuit fueled by recordings, notes, and conversations that painted a picture far removed from the tidy suicide verdict. His key findings: anomalies in the timeline, suspicious behaviors from those closest to Cobain, and a death scene that felt staged, like a bad noir film where the props don't quite match the script. It all implies a cover-up, a rush to close the book before the ink could dry on unanswered questions. Grant's challenge isn't just noise, it's a persistent echo, suggesting that the official narrative might be protecting more than it reveals, shielding motives tangled in fame, fortune, and the fragile egos of a music empire on the brink. Then there's Brian Burnett, the forensic specialist who stepped into this fray with a peer-reviewed paper in 2025 and 2026. A document that didn't just poke holes in the story, it tore through it like a bullet through cheap fabric. Burnett, collaborating with independent researcher Michelle Wilkins, led this privately authored deep dive. Their work emerging in an era where true crime podcasts and online sleuths have turned cold cases into viral obsessions, the air thick with digital chatter and rediscovered evidence files. Their methodology was meticulous, poring over autopsy reports, crime scene photos, and toxicology data with the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. All while the world outside buzzed with the distractions of modern life, social media storms, and fleeting headlines. Motivated by a quest for scientific truth amid the fog of celebrity myth-making, they argued for a homicide hypothesis. Specifically, a forced heroin overdose, enumerating at least 10 scene and autopsy anomalies that clash violently with the suicide ruling. Picture the dim glow of a late-night lab, the scent of sterile reports mingling with the musty odor of archived documents. Here, Burnett and Wilkins highlighted discrepancies like the impossible blood morphine levels, far beyond what a self-inflicted dose could produce without immediate incapacitation. They pointed to the shotgun's position, awkwardly placed as if by an unseen hand, and the absence of fingerprints on key items, anomalies that whisper of tampering in the greenhouse's stifling confines, where the spring air carried the faint rot of unresolved tragedy. Motives they cited swirl around financial and managerial pressures within Cobain's circle, debts, contracts, and power plays that could turn allies into adversaries overnight, implying a darker incentive to silence a voice that was growing too unpredictable. Neither Grant nor Burnett and Wilkins named definitive perpetrators, but their work lays out a map of incentives, a constellation of possibilities where greed and control orbit the stars' untimely fall. It's in these findings that the tension builds to a breaking point. Here's a heroin concentration in the bloodstream that defies the laws of human physiology for a voluntary act, unraveling the suicide thread by thread. Grant's early doubts, born from those initial frantic searches, dovetail with Burnett's forensic rigor, creating a chorus that challenges the silence of officialdom. Each anomaly a brick in a wall of evidence begging for re-evaluation. In the cynical undercurrents of this tale, their motivations reveal a broader implication: that truth, in high-profile deaths, often bends to the will of those with the most to lose, leaving skeptics like these to pick up the pieces in the dim light of hindsight. As we linger on their contributions, the air grows heavier with the weight of what they've uncovered. Observations that contest the narrative, not with wild speculation, but with the quiet insistence of facts that refuse to align. Tom Grant's transition from hired investigator to ardent advocate underscores how personal involvement can ignite a lifelong crusade. His recordings and timelines painting a scene rife with deception in the grunge-saturated streets of Seattle. Burnett's paper, meanwhile, stands as a beacon in the fog, its peer-reviewed status lending credibility to claims of forced overdose, where the heroin's grip was too tight. Too calculated for a man allegedly seeking his own end. Together, they enumerate anomalies like the untouched cigar box of drugs, the peculiar note phrasing, and blood spatter patterns that don't match a solo act. Each one a ripple in the pond of official certainty. These challengers highlight incentives among Cobain's inner circle: financial windfalls from a timely death, managerial control slipping away, implying that suicide might have been a convenient label for something far more sinister. In the end, their work doesn't just question, it demands we look closer, setting the stage for the contradictions that keep this case alive in the collective memory. Having studied the key dissenting figures and their thrust, we now turn to the hard details. The evidentiary anomalies they cite to challenge the suicide ruling. Let's start with the autopsy report, that cold ledger of final truths, where the body's secrets spill out under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights in a morgue somewhere in the damp chill of a Seattle winter. The findings revealed high levels of morphine coursing through his veins, accompanied by necrosis in the brain and liver. Decay that whispers of prolonged suffering, not the swift end a shotgun promises. Fluid filled the lungs, a telltale sign of hypoxia, and petechial hemorrhaging dotted the eyes like tiny accusations staring back at the examiner. This was the era of grunge fading into oblivion. The mid-90s air thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken regrets in dimly lit bars where secrets were traded like currency. These details paint a picture of a death drawn out, agonizing, far from the instantaneous blast officials claimed. It's a timeline that twists like a knife, suggesting he lingered in torment before any trigger was pulled. Then there's the heroin kit, neatly arranged beside the body, syringes capped and orderly as if set for a display in some macabre museum exhibit. In the cluttered haze of a rock star's final room, amid the scent of stale sweat and fading incense from an era of excess, where flannel shirts lay crumpled on the floor and the distant hum of city traffic seeped through cracked windows, this precision stands out. If he was incapacitated, slipping into overdose's grip, how could such tidiness prevail? It's a setup that mocks the chaos of true despair. implying hands other than his own might have staged the scene. Consider the spent shell casing, found in a position that defies the Remington Model 11's ejection pattern, as if gravity and mechanics conspired against the official account. Private investigators recreated the shot in echoing warehouses, the metallic tang of gunpowder hanging heavy in the air, mirroring the industrial grit of 1994 Seattle, where rain-slicked streets reflected neon signs from dive bars filled with lost souls. Ballistics show the shell should have flown one way, yet it landed another, a misalignment that echoes like a false note in a symphony, unraveling the thread of self-inflicted death. And the mechanical improbability of it all, firing that shotgun while comatose, the weapon's kick and required grip, demanding consciousness he supposedly lacked. Experts pored over diagrams in smoke-filled offices, the scratch of pencils on paper underscoring debates that stretched into the night, evoking the shadowy underworld of noir detectives from a bygone age, transplanted to this grimy Pacific Northwest backdrop. This defies physics as much as human endurance, a contradiction that hollows out the suicide verdict like rot in an old beam. The left hand, purportedly on the barrel, appeared unusually clean, devoid of the blood spatter one would expect from such violent proximity. Photos from the scene captured the sterile gleam under forensic lights, contrasting the blood-soaked chaos around it. In a time when forensic science was evolving, amid the buzz of pagers and the clatter of typewriters in precincts reeking of coffee and desperation. That pristine hand suggests manipulation after the fact, a detail that pierces the veil of certainty like a sudden crack in a mirror. Handwriting in the suicide note shifts noticeably in the final lines. As multiple experts have attested, their analyses laid out on cluttered desks amid stacks of yellowed papers. The ink's flow changes, loops and slants altering in the flickering light of desk lamps, reminiscent of forged documents in espionage tales from the Cold War's lingering shadow, now playing out in this modern tragedy. Such discrepancies hint at forgery, undermining the note's authenticity and casting doubt on the entire narrative of despair. Finally, the C-First MasterCard attempts, recorded after the estimated time of death, pinging from locations that shouldn't have been active. In the digital hum of early internet banking, with modems dialing up in quiet homes while the world outside thrummed with the grunge scene's dying echoes, these transactions linger like ghosts in the machine. They suggest activity beyond the grave, a financial footprint that steps outside the bounds of a concluded life, challenging the very timeline of demise. These anomalies accumulate like shadows in an alley, each one deepening the mystery until the official story feels as fragile as a house of cards in a stiff breeze. After detailing the contradictions, we will present the official narrative in its full scope, explaining how authorities interpreted the evidence to conclude suicide. We've just peeled back the layers of those nagging contradictions, the forensic puzzles and scene oddities that cast long shadows over the official tale. But now, let's step into the well-lit room of the establishment's account, where the Seattle Police Department and the King County Medical Examiner built their case for suicide with what they deemed unassailable evidence. It starts with the suicide note, that crumpled piece of paper discovered right there in the greenhouse atop the garage, penned on a sheet from a red notebook and pierced by a pen to hold it in place. In the drizzly haze of April 1994, Seattle, amid the echoes of grunge anthems fading into memory, this note was analyzed meticulously by the State Crime Lab, their experts affirming it as unmistakably in Kurt Cobain's looping handwriting. The words themselves spoke of despair and disillusionment, a farewell laced with the bitterness of a rock icon unraveling, and in the broader sweep of Cobain's turbulent life, marked by stomach pains, addiction battles, and the relentless grind of fame. This document implied a man who had reached his breaking point, choosing to end it all on his own terms. Then there's the Remington Model 11 shotgun, found draped across his body in that cluttered room above the garage, its barrel still warm from the fatal discharge, the air thick with the metallic tang of gunpowder, and the faint, acrid scent of heroin residue, lingering like a ghost in the dim light filtering through the windows. Positioned precisely as it was, with Cobain's left hand gripping the barrel and the trigger accessible to his right, it aligned perfectly with the mechanics of self-infliction, a detail that the investigators noted in their reports, underscoring how the physical evidence pointed inexorably to a solitary act amid the solitude of his lakeside home. The coroner's autopsy reinforced this narrative, detailing a gunshot wound to the head that was devastatingly consistent with a self-inflicted blast from such a weapon. Conducted in the sterile chill of the medical examiner's office, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of distant traffic from the bustling city outside, this examination painted a picture of intentional finality. It suggested not just an end, but a deliberate escape from the demons that had hounded him, implications that rippled through the music world, cementing the tragedy as a cautionary tale of genius consumed by inner turmoil. Toxicology reports added another layer, revealing lethally high levels of morphine from heroin, compounded by diazepam in his system. In an era when Seattle streets were shadowed by the opioid underbelly fueling the grunge scene, these findings emerged from lab tests that smelled of chemical reagents and precision machinery. Such concentrations implied a body overwhelmed, a deliberate overdose that weakened him before the shotgun's roar, pointing to a calculated sequence where depression's grip led to this fatal cocktail. A stark reminder of how addiction's chains can drag even the brightest stars into the abyss. Eyewitness testimonies bolstered the case, with friends, bandmates, and family recounting Cobain's profound depression, his prior overdose in Rome just weeks earlier, and his abrupt withdrawal from touring life. These accounts floated through smoke-filled bars and rehearsal spaces heavy with the strum of electric guitars, painting a man raveling in plain sight. They implied a pattern of self-destruction that culminated inevitably in that greenhouse, urging us to see the suicide not as a surprise, but as the tragic endpoint of a well-documented decline. Underpinning it all was the Seattle Police Department's meticulous chain of custody protocols, their investigative reports chronicling every step from the electrician's grim discovery to the sealing of evidence bags. In the bustling precincts, alive with the clatter of typewriters and the murmur of detectives trading war stories, these documents ensured no tampering, no breaks in the evidentiary thread. This rigor implied a foundation of reliability, a bulwark against doubt, that held the official story firm against the tides of speculation swirling in the media frenzy that followed. Years later, in 2014, Detective Mike Ciasinski reopened the files for a cold case review, poring over faded photos and yellowed reports in a quiet office bathed in the glow of computer screens. His conclusion echoed the original verdict. No new evidence to suggest foul play, nothing to warrant reopening the case. It was a reaffirmation that cut through the conspiracy chatter,
implying the endurance of facts over fleeting theories. Yet here's the rub that gnaws at the edges of certainty. Those toxicology levels.
So sky high they beggar belief for a man supposedly able to pen a note and pull a trigger with precision. Together, these elements form the backbone of the official narrative, a structure built on forensic certainty and human testimony. In the rain-soaked streets of Seattle, where the grunge era's echoes still resonate, this account stands as a testament to investigative thoroughness, challenging us to weigh it against the shadows we've already explored. It's a story of a man lost to his own darkness, supported by evidence that, on the surface, snaps together like a well-oiled lock. But as we turn the page, we'll delve into the counter-arguments, the theories of forced overdose and staged scenes that dissenting voices champion with equal fervor. We've just peeled back the layers of the official story, the one that paints Kurt Cobain's death as a tragic but straightforward suicide, backed by autopsy reports and witness accounts that seem to fit neatly into place. But in the shadowed corners of this narrative, where the grunge haze of early 90s Seattle lingers like cigarette smoke in a dimly lit bar, there emerges an alternative hypothesis. One championed by forensic experts like Brian Burnett and Michelle Wilkins, along with investigators such as Tom Grant. It's a theory that suggests Cobain didn't pull the trigger on his own life. Instead, he was forcibly overdosed with heroin, rendered helpless in the greenhouse above his garage, and then shot, with the entire scene meticulously staged to mimic a self-inflicted end. This isn't some wild conjecture born from tabloid frenzy. It's rooted in a peer-reviewed forensic paper, led by Burnett and Wilkins, dissecting the evidence with the precision of a scalpel under fluorescent lights that buzz like persistent doubts. The air in that greenhouse on April 8, 1994, carried the metallic tang of blood and the faint, acrid scent of gunpowder. But according to this view, it masked a darker orchestration, one where incapacity preceded the fatal shot, implying not despair, but deliberation. At the heart of this hypothesis lie 10 forensic anomalies, each one a thread that, when pulled, unravels the suicide tapestry. Burnett and his colleagues enumerated them methodically, from autopsy findings to scene inconsistencies, painting a picture of foul play amid the Pacific Northwest rain that drummed on the roof like unanswered questions. First, the autopsy revealed fluid in Cobain's lungs and necrosis in his brain and liver, signs of prolonged hypoxia from an overdose that would have left him incapacitated long before any gunshot. In the dim glow of that April morning, with the city's fog rolling in from Lake Washington, this suggests he couldn't have administered the shot himself, forcing us to consider an external hand guiding the events. Then there's the neatly arranged heroin kit beside the body, syringes capped and paraphernalia laid out, with an orderliness that defies the chaos of a self-overdose. Amid the scattered remnants of a rock star's turbulent life, this pristine setup whispers of staging, a cleanup job that implies someone else tidied up after the fact, turning tragedy into theater. The spent shell casing from the Remington Model 11 shotgun was found in a position inconsistent with its natural ejection pattern, lying to the left instead of the expected right. In the confined space of the greenhouse, where sunlight filtered through grimy windows, this misalignment challenges the physics of a solo act, hinting at manipulation to fit a predetermined script. Multiple handwriting experts noted shifts in the suicide note's final lines, where the script slants differently, the pressure uneven, as if penned by another in the flickering light of a desk lamp. During an era when grunge anthems echoed through rainy streets, this discrepancy erodes the note's authenticity, suggesting forgery to seal the suicide illusion. Receipts for the gun and shells were discovered tucked into Cobain's clothing pockets, with additional shells arranged theatrically at his feet, in the quiet aftermath, as police radios crackled outside. This overly convenient placement feels less like oversight and more like props in a staged production, underscoring a narrative crafted for investigators' eyes. Attempts to use Cobain's See First MasterCard surfaced on April 6, 1994, after the estimated time of death, transactions that pinged in the digital ether while his body lay undiscovered. Against the backdrop of Seattle's booming tech scene, this posthumous activity raises alarms of identity misuse, pointing to someone exploiting his absence for gain. Among the other anomalies, the absence of fingerprints on the shotgun, despite recent handling, blood patterns that didn't match a self-inflicted wound spray, the locked greenhouse door from inside, yet no key found, and toxicology levels of heroin so high they would paralyze motor functions instantly. In the damp chill of that spring, with Nirvana's music still pulsing through the veins of a generation, these details accumulate like evidence in a forgotten file, each one implying not a man's final despair, but a calculated homicide disguised as such. It's this cluster of inconsistencies that defies the gravity of the official verdict, pulling the entire case into a vortex of suspicion. Motives swirl around like the espresso steam in Seattle cafes, centering on Nirvana's immense profitability and the tangled web of management interests. In an industry where millions hung in the balance, Cobain's desire to disband the group threatened fortunes. And while no definitive perpetrator is named, the financial incentives loom large, casting long shadows over those who profited from his legacy. Despite the extensive debate, from heated discussions in dimly lit bars to online forums flickering in the night, there's been no formal judicial examination. No courtroom where these anomalies could be cross-examined under oath. The case remains sealed in the annals of controversy, a testament to how power and narrative can eclipse even the most glaring doubts. As we sift through these shadows, the rain-slicked streets of Seattle seem to whisper possibilities, urging us to question what lies beneath the surface. The alternative hypothesis doesn't just challenge the facts, it reframes the entire era, turning a cultural icon's demise into a noir mystery that refuses easy resolution. And yet, in the absence of concrete proof, it lingers like an unresolved chord in one of Cobain's songs, demanding we listen closer. We've just unpacked the alternative homicide hypothesis, built on a constellation of forensic and circumstantial contradictions that still haunt the edges of this story like shadows in a dimly lit alley. But theories alone don't bury the dead. They ripple outward, shaking the foundations of lives, legacies, and institutions long after the initial quake. In the wake of Kurt Cobain's death, the aftershocks hit hardest on those closest to him, starting with his family, where grief tangled with suspicion in a web that no one could fully escape. Courtney Love, Kurt's widow and the fiery frontwoman of Hole, found herself at the epicenter. She had originally hired private investigator Tom Grant to track down her missing husband in those frantic days leading up to April 1994. Amid the haze of Seattle's grunge scene where the air was thick with cigarette smoke, amplifier feedback, and the raw edge of unspoken desperations. Yet that decision, born from a mix of concern and chaos, would later fuel endless debates about her role, casting long shadows over her public persona and implying a deeper entanglement in the mysteries that refused to die with Kurt. Tom Grant himself became a fixture in this unfolding drama, publicly challenging the completeness of the Seattle Police Department's investigation for decades. His voice echoing through dimly lit press conferences and late-night radio interviews in the post-grunge era when the music industry's glitter had faded to a dull, cynical sheen. Grant's relentless pursuit, piecing together tapes and timelines amid the clutter of outdated answering machines and yellowed newspaper clippings, suggested not just oversight, but a deliberate veil, eroding trust in official narratives and leaving a legacy of doubt that permeated every corner of Cobain's story. The Seattle Police Department felt the tremors too, their reputation battered as whispers of incompetence grew into roars, despite persistent calls to reopen the case. The SBD and King County Medical Examiner have steadfastly declined, citing an insufficiency of new evidence, all while the rain-slick streets of Seattle in the 90s buzzed with the hum of fax machines churning out FOIA requests and the distant wail of sirens that seemed to underscore the city's unspoken secrets. This refusal, set against a backdrop of mounting public scrutiny, implied a fortress mentality, one that protected not just conclusions, but the very system that drew them, allowing skepticism to fester like an untreated wound in the body of justice. Beyond the personal, the cultural ramifications sprawled wide, mythologizing Cobain and Nirvana's legacy into something almost sacred, yet forever tainted. The grunge movement, once a raw rebellion against the polished excess of the 80s, now carried the weight of tragedy, its anthems echoing in smoky bars and college dorms where posters of Kurt hung like icons, the air heavy with the scent of flannel and faded dreams. This elevation to mythic status didn't just preserve his music, it amplified the controversies, turning every lyric and riff into potential clues, and ensuring that Nirvana's influence lingered as both a beacon and a cautionary tale in the annals of rock history. Documentary filmmakers seized on this fertile ground, with works like Soaked in Bleach promoting alternative theories that challenged the suicide verdict, their cameras rolling through fog-shrouded Seattle neighborhoods and dimly lit archives in the digital age, where the click of keyboards replaced the clatter of typewriters. Yet the quest for truth felt as gritty as ever. These films didn't merely retell the story, they ignited fresh debates, suggesting layers of cover-up that kept the public's fascination burning. And in doing so, they reshaped perceptions of Cobain's death from a closed chapter to an open wound in popular culture. The long-term media interest sustained this debate, with articles and specials dissecting every angle amid the glow of computer screens in newsrooms that never slept. The era's shift from print to pixels, only accelerating the spread of rumors and revelations alike. Such scrutiny implied a collective unwillingness to let go, transforming private grief into public spectacle, and ensuring that Cobain's shadow loomed larger in death than in life. Challenges in reopening the case compounded the fallout, as advocates pushed against bureaucratic walls that stood firm. The scent of stale coffee in precinct waiting rooms, mingling with the frustration of denied appeals, in a time when forensic science was evolving yet bound by old verdicts. This impasse didn't just stall justice, it deepened the emotional toll on those close to Cobain, from family members wrestling with perpetual doubt to fans whose idols became enigmas, hinting at a profound human cost where closure remained an elusive ghost. And amid all this, there's a revelation from Grant's files that pierces the veil of official certainty. A timeline mismatch that defies the logic of the reported events, leaving no room for coincidence in the puzzle of that fateful day. The professional fallout extended to investigators like Grant, whose careers morphed into crusades, their offices cluttered with boxes of evidence, gathering dust under fluorescent lights that buzzed like persistent doubts. This transformation wasn't mere obsession. It underscored a broader erosion of faith in authority, where one man's quest became a symbol for all who questioned the neatly tied bows of official reports. For Courtney Love, the personal became inescapably public, her every move dissected in tabloids that reeked of cheap ink and sensationalism. The 90s media frenzy turning her mourning into a sideshow. That scrutiny implied not just loss, but a lifelong sentence in the court of public opinion, where implications of involvement lingered like smoke after a fire. Ultimately, these aftershocks reshaped the grunge mythology, turning Seattle's sound into a dirge for lost innocence, its echoes fading into the new millennium yet never fully silenced. And as the debates rage on, the emotional scars on family, friends, and fans serve as a stark reminder of tragedy's enduring grip. Next, we will identify unresolved questions and the continuing gap between the closed official verdict and contested anomalies that leave the case shrouded in mystery. We've lingered long enough on the ripples of Kurt Cobain's death, those profound echoes through music, culture, and the fragile lives left in its wake. But now, as the shadows lengthen in this tale, we turn to the unresolved questions that still haunt the case, the loose threads that dangle like cigarette smoke in a dimly lit room, refusing to dissipate even after all these years. Let's start with that infamous suicide note, discovered in the greenhouse above the garage, a piece of paper that was meant to seal the narrative, but instead unraveled it for those willing to look closer. The fact is stark. The handwriting in the final lines appears to shift dramatically, as if penned by a different hand. Those last words about love and farewell not matching the looping scrawl of the earlier paragraphs. It was the grunge-soaked Seattle of 1994, where the rain-slick streets echoed with the raw energy of a music scene on the brink of implosion. And in the quiet aftermath, experts pored over that note under harsh fluorescent lights, the air thick with the scent of developing chemicals and unspoken doubts. This discrepancy gnaws at the foundation of the official verdict, suggesting perhaps an addition after the fact. A forgery that turns what should be a personal epitaph into a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit the frame of suicide. Yet, no courtroom ever dissected it. The anomalies hung in the air, unchallenged by cross-examination or judicial scrutiny, leaving skeptics to whisper in the corners of forgotten bars. Then there's the spent shell casing, ejected from the Remington shotgun and found not where ballistics would predict, but oddly positioned to the left of the body, defying the weapon's rightward ejection pattern. In the cluttered greenhouse, amid the scattered tools and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder that lingered long after the shot, investigators snapped photos under the gray April sky, capturing a scene that seemed staged in its disarray. It's a placement that mocks the laws of physics, dictating how a shell should fly, implying manipulation or an unseen hand, rearranging the evidence before the world arrived. Police reports glossed over it, and no formal inquiry demanded an explanation, allowing this inconsistency to fester like an untreated wound in the body of the investigation. Compounding the mystery, no usable fingerprints were found on the gun or its shells, despite the recoil and handling that should have left smudges of oil and sweat from Cobain's final moments.
The air in the medical examiner's office was sterile, laced with the sharp bite of formaldehyde, as technicians dusted the weapon in a room humming with the low buzz of fluorescent bulbs.
Their efforts yielding nothing but clean surfaces. This absence erodes the assumption of solitary despair, hinting at a cleanup that erases traces of truth, turning the instrument of death into a ghostly relic untouched by human hands. Again, no judge or jury ever probed this void. The official narrative marched on, unburdened by the weight of such evidentiary silence. Photographs from the scene reveal another oddity. Cobain's left hand, purportedly gripping the barrel, appears unusually clean, free of the soot and residue that a shotgun blast would typically deposit. The greenhouse glass was fogged with the chill of early spring, and as flashbulbs popped in the dim light, casting long shadows over the body, that pristine hand stood out against the chaos, almost too perfect in its unmarred state. Such cleanliness challenges the mechanics of the act itself, whispering of intervention that polished away the gritty aftermath, leaving behind a sanitized version of tragedy. Officials dismissed it without trial, letting this detail slip into the annals of unresolved forensics, untested by adversarial fire. Finally, the See-First MasterCard, with transaction attempts logged after the estimated time of death. A digital ghost swiping through the ether when Cobain should have been beyond such worldly concerns. In the bustling bank offices of mid-90s Seattle, where the clatter of keyboards mixed with the murmur of phone lines, records emerged showing activity that outlived the man, as if his financial shadow lingered in the system long after the light had faded. These posthumous pings unravel the timeline of solitude, pointing to possible foul play or error that extends the mystery into the realm of the inexplicable. No legal challenge ever brought them to light in a homicide inquiry. They remain footnotes in a closed file, echoes of what might have been explored. These gaps, these lingering shadows, perpetuate an uncertainty that has stretched across decades, fueled by official reluctance to revisit alternate hypotheses. As if reopening the case would shatter the fragile peace of a concluded story. In the absence of formal adjudication, conspiracy theories bloom like weeds in an untended garden, and the truth, whatever it may be, remains entombed in ambiguity. As we wrap this segment, the questions hang heavy, setting the stage for our final reflection on why these contradictions endure and what that enduring silence truly signifies. We've just waded through the murky depths of those lingering questions, the ones that cling to Kurt Cobain's death like fog on a Seattle morning, refusing to dissipate, even under the harsh light of official decrees. Now, as we stand at the edge of this investigation, it's time to ponder the silence that echoes louder than any scream, the persistent mystery that keeps this case from finding true rest. Kurt Cobain was discovered in that greenhouse above his garage, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and spent gunpowder, his body positioned in a way that seemed almost staged for the world's prying eyes. The fact remains stark and unyielding. He was found with a Remington shotgun laid across his chest, the barrel still warm from the fatal blast. Yet the scene whispered of impossibilities that no one in power wanted to hear. In the grunge-saturated haze of 1994, where flannel shirts hung heavy with the weight of rebellion and record sales soared on the wings of raw emotion, this detail sat uneasy, like a discordant note in a symphony of sorrow. It forces us to question the very mechanics of mortality. How a man, supposedly overwhelmed by his demons, could fire such a weapon and end up with it neatly placed, when toxicology reports hinted at a body already subdued by substances that would render movement a Herculean task. Multiple anomalies in the autopsy and crime scene photos suggest incapacitation long before the trigger was pulled. The blood evidence didn't pool as expected, and the positioning defied the brutal physics of a self-inflicted wound. Picture the dim light filtering through greenhouse glass, casting long shadows over a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and faded dreams. In an era when Nirvana's music was both a balm and a blade for a generation lost in its own angst. These inconsistencies gnaw at the edges of the official narrative, revealing how private agony can be overshadowed by the spectacle of fame, leaving truth buried under layers of myth and merchandise. Authorities ruled it suicide with a swiftness that bordered on indifference, citing a lack of compelling new evidence to justify reopening the file. Even as private investigators and skeptics piled up contradictions like unpaid bills. The streets of Seattle buzzed with rumors in those post-mortem months, coffee shops alive with heated debates amid the aroma of fresh brews and rain-soaked pavement, while the music industry churned out tributes that turned tragedy into marketable lore. This refusal underscores the chasm between institutional inertia and the relentless pursuit of clarity, where cultural icons like Cobain become untouchable relics, their stories shaped more by profit than by probing inquiry. There's a persistent gap between the closed official verdict and the swarm of contested technical anomalies, fingerprints absent where they should be, shell casings misplaced, and a note that read more like a resignation letter than a final farewell. In the neon glow of 90s excess, where tabloids fed on the carcasses of fallen stars and fans mourned in mosh pits echoing with distorted guitars, these gaps widened, fueled by a public hungry for answers, yet sated by the myth. It's this void that exposes how narratives are forged, not in courtrooms but in boardrooms, where the machinery of fame grinds truth into palatable fiction, leaving justice as an afterthought. The case was never tested under the scrutiny of cross-examination in a courtroom. No witnesses grilled, no evidence dissected by adversarial fire, just a coroner's stamp and a file gathering dust. Amid the clamor of memorial concerts and bootleg tapes circulating in underground markets, the air heavy with incense and unspoken doubts, this omission hung like a noose, tightening around the throat of transparency. Without that legal crucible, the anomalies fester unaddressed, highlighting how institutional boundaries can shield the powerful from accountability, perpetuating a silence that drowns out cries for reevaluation. Cobain sat at the center of intersecting forces, private suffering clashing with public institutional incentives, his pain commodified into albums and apparel, while the truth twisted under commercial pressures. The world watched as his image was immortalized in posters and documentaries, the scent of sold-out arenas mingling with the bitterness of unresolved grief in a culture that both idolized and devoured its heroes. These forces illustrate the complex mythology that clarifies some facets of his life, yet obscures the essence of his death, turning a man's end into a spectacle where commerce trumps closure. And here's the riddle that warps the foundation of every assumption. If incapacitation gripped him before the shot, how did that shotgun end up so precisely across his chest, defying the chaos of collapse? As we close this chapter, I urge you to weigh these shadows, the boundaries of power, the myths we build, the pressures that silence inquiry against the stark light of what might have been. If only the questions had been allowed their day in court. Kurt Cobain's death remains a noir tale of agony and spectacle, a mystery that persists because sometimes the truth is the one thing too dangerous to set free. This is Bill Dunlap, signing off from the darkened corners of dark investigations. Until next time, keep questioning the silence.